Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. Typically, you motivate a horse to move by dangling a carrot in front of it, or at least that's the folklore, but black people don't get offered carrots. We only get sticks. See, the way that it works is with black people, it's never the carrot and the stick, it's just the stick, because these white supremacists already ate the carrot. And speaking of eating, that brings us to Stacey Abrams. The white media is doing a post-mortem on her latest electoral failure, and the New York Times has been forced to admit what the black media has been saying all along. Though watch out for the slant they put on it, we'll get to that later, but the Times piece starts out by pointing out how Abrams was apparently annoyed with a certain black radio host in Atlanta. So Abrams called this black man up live on air to lecture him, which seems to be her reflexive action whenever she talks to black men. She complained that it was disturbing that he had said she wasn't talking to black people. Apparently she took offense at that. When the black male host refused to back down, she hung up. And that's Stacey Abrams' problem right there in a nutshell. All you Abrams bots, you want to know why she lost? It's because she didn't have support in places like Atlanta, which is what the black media told you from the jump. No matter what the shea butter crowd may want to tell themselves, Stacey Abrams didn't have anyone fooled when it came to her contempt for black men. She had to express it. Instead of calling the host up and trying to finesse or schmooze him or make nice, she instead called up complaining. And it became very obvious that not only was Stacey Abrams not offering anything to black men, she wasn't offering anything to black women either. She was trying to figure out if she could bluff her way past the black vote without actually having to promise anything, and it was excruciatingly obvious that this is what she was doing. And according to the Times piece, this radio host was a supporter of hers. That's right, this is how she treats the people who supported her. Stacey Abrams was hemorrhaging support, everyone could see it, and you have a radio host who was honest enough to say it, and she calls him up just to complain and then hangs up on him when he doesn't bow down to her. The Times piece also mentions another black man in Atlanta who said that he had tried to help Abrams build up her support with black business owners. All she was willing to do, though, was some Zoom meetings. Meanwhile, according to this DNC strategist, Governor Brian Kemp was actually meeting with these black business owners. That right there is an example of the old maxim that people will sooner support an uncertain something as opposed to a certain nothing. And it doesn't surprise me at all that Stacey Abrams limited her contact with the black community to Zoom meetings. Kamala Harris did the same thing, by the way. She had virtual town halls after she and Jim Crow Joe won office, not because she was concerned about COVID, but because virtual meetings gave her the ability to completely control who could join her meetings and who gets to be heard. That's not somebody who wants to hear from the public. That's someone who's attempting to craft a captive audience who will listen to their stump speeches and won't question their pre-canned talking points. But then the Times got to what I think was the second most important point of the piece. Abrams wants to be a national figure. The governorship of Georgia is just a stepping stone to what she really wants, and that's to find herself a permanent place in D.C. Abrams will settle for being vice president if she has to, but it's painfully obvious she wants to be a presidential contender. She raised more money than Brian Kemp, but a lot of her financial support came from outside Georgia. The day after she won the primary, she flew to New York for a fundraiser. That tells you everything you need to know right there. So Stacey Abrams was more concerned with solidifying her support with donors at the national level than she was with talking with black voters at the local level. And even on the few occasions when she did lower herself to talk with the black plebes, she kept them at arm's length by doing Zoom calls, or, as with the radio host, she called them up just to give them a tongue lashing. Build local, think global is good advice, but Stacey Abrams was hustling backwards. She was thinking globally but wasn't building locally at all, which defeats the entire purpose of what she was supposed to be doing. Talk about taking your eye off the ball. And the New York Times duplicitous slant they tried to put on it was that Stacey Abrams didn't have enough support from black sororities and fraternities. Gee, didn't Kamala Harris have all that support from those black sororities and fraternities? And how did that work out for her presidential campaign? But the white media doesn't mind mentioning black frats and sororities because these mostly are people who want to be boule if they're not already. These are people who in most cases, not all, but in most cases are genuine certified government-approved bootlicks. So there's no harm in going ahead and mentioning them. Most of them are not going to be doing anything to fight white supremacy. Most of them are going to be trying to find a comfortable place under it. The white media knows exactly what black support was deficient in Stacey Abrams' campaign. They know exactly what black support that she was lacking and couldn't do without. And it wasn't these fraternities and sororities. But they also understand that they cannot validate that the black grassroots made the difference. Because if they do, then they also have to elevate and give voice to our agenda. And they're not about to do that. The white media is not going to commit suicide. So the same white media who told all of us how brilliant Stacey Abrams is and how she's a vote-getting machine, she's just a turn-out-the-vote dynamo, and how black people just fall at her feet, are now telling us that the reason she lost her gubernatorial bid a second time was because she just couldn't get enough black support. Stacey Abrams didn't want to be governor, she wants to be president, and everyone can see it. And if people get the idea that you're merely climbing the political ladder, they'll disengage from you and you won't be able to get them back. You can do all the insults and shaming tactics you want. It won't change anything. So once again, the white media is forced to have to come up with the admission, but only after their ploy fails. It's just like what happened with Michael Bloomberg. The white media was saying that stop and frisk hadn't hurt Bloomberg's support among black voters at all. The only reason they said that was because Bloomberg had a couple of rallies where he showed off his collection of pet Negro black mayors who clearly were hoping for political favors should Bloomberg win the presidency, and he also had a handful of clout-chasing pulpit pimps who couldn't wait to sell us out. He put some preachers in front of black folks, and as far as he's concerned, these Negroes, they don't know any better. That's the strategy that Bloomberg was using. But as it turned out, the black voters, the grassroots, were a lot smarter than Bloomberg gave them credit for. They were clearly smarter than he was. And the black parishioners of that Selma church killed Bloomberg's campaign cold. They defied their pork chop preacher and stood up for justice. They showed who really ran that church, and it wasn't that pulpit pimp calling himself the pastor who whored himself to Bloomberg. That's the reason why that pastor didn't say anything, couldn't do anything about it. He understood in that moment the congregation was telling him he had lost his legitimacy. All those pulpit pimps that he had with him, all of those buck-dancing mayors, all for nothing. And when Bloomberg's campaign imploded, the same USA Today that had been bragging that Bloomberg gets black support despite stop and frisk turned right around and said his campaign's ending. And the reason why? Stop and frisk. The white media's job is to control you through propaganda. They put a lot of effort into convincing you that they know more than you do because they have the ability to put cameras and microphones in different places very quickly. So because they can put a camera and a microphone in faraway places very quickly, that means you should listen to them, whatever they say. They have to know more than you do. Why? Look at the resources they have. They know more about you than you know about yourself. At least that's what they would like you to believe. But like every other aspect of the white media, it just ain't true. So where does Stacey Abrams go from here? She's failed to win political office since 2017. She can fundraise, but the only reason she was getting money in the first place for this year's election was because of her razor-thin loss to Kemp 4 years ago. But now she's raised far more money than she did 4 years ago, and she lost by an even larger margin. It's not clear how she'll keep the donors giving her money. Maybe she'll do like Pete Buttigieg and beg Biden for a White House gig. Biden's already purged most of the high-profile Negroes who are in his administration. Simone Sanders, Ashley Etienne, Cedric Richmond. So there's room, but the problem for Abrams is it's obvious she wants to be vice president, and I think we can all guess how Kamala Harris feels about that. It's way too early to say that white power will break this tool, Stacey Abrams, but at this point we can safely say she played herself. She offered black voters no tangibles. She offered no concrete policies. She didn't even listen to black voters, and she won't learn anything from this latest defeat. Hopefully, though, some of those black voters in Georgia might start to. A few of them at least. See, Abrams' disdain for black voters also mirrors her monetary mentality as well. Far as she was concerned, as long as she had rich white donors backing her up outside of Georgia, it really didn't matter if she met with black businessmen, because after all, what are they going to do? Give her donations? She's got white donors for that. And that's the mentality of the low-down Willie Browns and such. Why should they do anything for black people? What's important is making sure that they keep their white donor and political support in place. After all, they can just take black voter support completely for granted. They've been doing it up until now. What Stacey Abrams utterly fails to understand is that the political landscape is littered with candidates who raised far more money than their opponents and still lost the election. Mitt Romney comes to mind, but the best example of all was when Donald Trump absolutely crushed the entire GOP field in the 2015 primaries. A number of his opponents had far more money than he did, especially then Florida Governor Jeb Bush. I think history will repeat itself if Trump has to lock horns with DeSantis, but now we can add Stacey Abrams to that shameful list. She took first place when it came to collecting campaign donations, but second place when it comes to collecting votes. And in politics, there's no prize for second place. And another political reality that Abrams failed to understand or accept is that black people, we're talking about black men and black women alike, are starting to reassert ourselves. And there's a lot of people who don't like it because they weren't expecting it. But this was always inevitable. You hang a carrot in front of a horse, and they'll follow it. But if all you dangle in front of that horse is a stick with a string, then you can't be surprised when the horse goes nowhere. And if you make it a point to only use the stick with the horse, don't be surprised when that horse throws you off its back. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Miss Debbie, P. Jones, ACAB Devil, Ruger, and Yumuka H. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.